Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. What a season it's been for JSN. Already last week, he beat the all-time record for receiving yards in a season for a Seattle Seahawks. So this week, Minnesota coming in. The defense has been decent versus the past this season, but JSN, it doesn't matter the matchup. Him and Sam Darnold have been locked in all season long. He's a matchup nightmare. And once again this week, I think he goes out there as a big game. Number 2, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. It's been another big year for Jamar Chase. He was suspended last week's ball game. He's back, and Joe Burrow is back in the lineup as well for the Cincinnati Bengal team. So this week in a matchup with Baltimore team he's had good success against throughout his career within the division. I expect him to go out there and not miss a beat. Number 3, Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Rice, it's been a great season for him ever since he returned from suspension. This week, a good matchup at the Dallas Cowboys, where we both saw A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith have good games last week, even though they blew that lead and lost. But Rashee Rice, he's an elite wide receiver, and we've seen it now since he's been back. And this week, like I said, with a good matchup at Dallas, he should go out there and put up some numbers. Number 4, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. And Nacua having a great season, no doubt about it. He's slowed down a little bit from having those monster games, Nacua, but still steady, still putting up some big points for fantasy owners. And this week, I think Nacua, once again, in a good matchup at Carolina, where their middle-of-the-pack defense has a nice game. Number 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So Amon-Ra, it's been another big season for him. Him and Jared Goff have been locked in. And with Sam Laporta out, he's going to keep getting those targets. This Amon-Ra. So last week, 149 yards. Found the end zone in that one versus the Giants. And this week, Green Bay Packers coming in. We know they're a good defense, but usually these Thanksgiving games are high scoring more times than not. Number 6, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. London, we'll see if he's back in the lineup this week. I expect he will be. And this week, it's a good matchup at the New York Jets, where obviously they traded Sauce Gardner at the deadline and Michael Carter, 2 solid corners, obviously, where their defense is down to backups. But also, this Jet team has been playing good football defensively over the last couple weeks. I know it hasn't amounted to much, obviously, but still, Drake London all season long is going out there and putting up numbers. And with Kirk Cousins in there at quarterback, possibly the ceiling is higher for him. Number 7, George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. What a first season it's been for Pickens in Dallas. He's been a better receiver than CeeDee Lamb this season. And last week, he led the comeback in a monster game, 9 catches, 146 yards, and a touchdown. So this week, a matchup, Kansas City coming in. Obviously, they're a good defense as well, but after the performance we saw last week from the Dallas Cowboys, I think they could put points on the board versus Kansas City defense. And Pickens, he could do it all, and him and Dak are really locked in. Number 8, Davante Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. Adams leads the league in touchdowns with 12 touchdowns on the season as a wide receiver. And this week, another good matchup with the Carolina Panthers, where they're middle-of-the-pack defense. And I think Adams goes out there and puts in another good performance. Number 9, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. Last week, he had the drop issues with CeeDee Lamb. Dropped a touchdown towards the end of that ball game that would have really put it away. But Lamb, we know he's an all-pro type of wide receiver. This season, I know the injury bug caught up to him a little bit, and he's had drop problems only in 2 games. Week 1 at Philly, and then last week's game versus Philly. So maybe, for whatever reason, it's just versus Philly. But this week, after a bad week last week for Lamb with the drops, I think he bounces back and has a good game. Number 10, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Nico Collins, it's been an up-and-down season for him. C.J. Stroud's going to return to the lineup this week for this Houston Texan team. And Collins, like I said, last week he didn't do much in that ball game, but he's too good of a wide receiver to hold down. And this week in Indianapolis, we saw Rashee Rice go out there versus defense, have a good game. I think Collins bounces back and has a nice performance this week. Number 11, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So since that whole thing where Brown said he's not happy in Philadelphia and he don't get the football pretty much is what he came out and said. The last couple weeks he's been force-fed by Jalen Hurts. Last week it was a big game for him. He was on his way, I thought, for 150-plus yards. In that one was A.J. Brown, and almost scored the second touchdown, but his foot was out of bounds before he hit the pylon. But this week, a good matchup versus Chicago. I know they create turnovers, get to the quarterback, but they do give up a lot of points, and I think Brown and this Eagle team, after a bad loss last week, and they bounce back Philadelphia, and I think Brown will be a big part of it again. Number 12, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Waddle, ever since he's been the number 1 wide receiver since Tyreek Hill went down and out for the season with the injury. Jalen Waddle, he's making plays. Him and Tua have been locked in up and down the field. And this week, a good matchup to come off the bye with New Orleans coming in, with their defense all season long hasn't stopped anyone. Number 13, Lad McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So McConkey's pulled away from Quentin Johnston, and Keenan Allen is the number one option in this passing game over the last month of the season for this Charger team. So McConkey, we know he can run all the routes. We know he's a good yard after catch guy. He can make plays down the field as well. And this week with a poor Raider defense coming in, and they're coming off bye as well as this Charger team, I expect them to go out there and have a good ball game. Number 14, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave, it's been a good season for him. Obviously, he's the number one option and the only reliable option besides Juwan Johnson in this passing game for this New Orleans Saints team. So it could be a ball game where they're either trailing or either a game where it's a mini high-scoring game between these two teams, because we know this Miami defense hasn't been good all season long. So Chris Olave, when healthy, we know he's a solid wide receiver. And this week in Miami, I think he'll go out there once again and have a good ball game. 15, Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this week we'll see if Baker Mayfield plays. It's his left shoulder, the AC joint sprain. But Egbuka, the last couple of weeks, the numbers have dropped off. This offense has been hit or miss all season long, so they might get reinforcements with Bucky Irvin returning to the lineup. Chris Godwin returning last week's game at the Rams, even though he was on limited snaps, and his snap count might go up. But like I said, Emeka Egbuka, the last couple of weeks, he's been up and down, possibly hitting that rookie wall, and teams really adjusting to him, covering him as well as number one option in this offense. 16, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Pittman arguably the number one option in this passing game for this Indianapolis Colts team. This week, definitely a tough matchup versus the Texans, one of the best, if not the best defense in the league. And he's going to have in this ball game, most likely, Derek Stingley shadowing him a majority of this game. So that's a very tough assignment for Michael Pittman. But him and Daniel Jones have been locked in all season long, going out there and making plays. 17, Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. Michael Wilson with a waiver wire pickup he's been over the last 2 weeks for Marvin Harrison out of the lineup. But the thing is, he didn't have any double-digit fantasy games until the last 2 games. Harrison was out of the lineup, so Wilson's going out there, he's making plays. Him and Jacoby Brissett are locked in, and they just got good ESP, knowing what the play's going to be, and these timing routes as well. So this week in a matchup where they could be trailing at Tampa Bay, and we know this Tampa secondary isn't good, I think Wilson once again goes out there, has a good ball game. 18, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings, and now looking like Max Brosmer is possibly going to be the starting quarterback this week for this Viking team with J.J. McCarthy concussed. Maybe it could be a good thing for Jefferson, because McCarthy each and every week, he was just getting worse and worse. But Jefferson, it's been a bad season for him, unfortunately. He's definitely been a bust, where he was going first round in every fantasy draft. So this week in a matchup at Seattle is a tough matchup. Tyreek Woolen most likely going to be covering him in this ball game. And like I said, Justin Jefferson, he really hasn't done much for this Viking team, where he's only had 1 or 2 big games all season long. 19, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith last week had a decent ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. Still the third option in the passing game, in my opinion, behind A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert for this Philadelphia Eagle team. But this week, a good matchup versus the Bears with their defense that gives up big plays. And this week, we know Smith and this offense, after not scoring pretty much for 3 quarters after going up 21-0 versus the Cowboys, I think they bounce back in a big way. Number 20, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. It's been a pretty solid season for Wan'Dale Robinson, number one option in the passing game, and it hasn't mattered if it was Russell Wilson early in the season, Jackson Dart, or Winston over the last couple weeks. But last week, Wan'Dale Robinson went off for a monster ball game with over 150 yards and found the end zone in that one at the Detroit line. So this week in a matchup at New England, I think Wan'Dale once again will get peppered with targets. We know he's a good underneath guy, but starting to get going in the deep ball category as well. 21, Tator McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. Tator McMillan, it's been a good rookie season for him, the number 1 wide receiver out in the NFL draft, picked by this Panther team. And last week it was a down game, but a touchdown salvage his day for Ted McMillan. But this week, it's going to be another game where they're going to be trailing with the Rams coming in. And I think a lot of garbage time we could see in this game. 22, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers, it's been an all right season for him. He's the number 1 option in this passing game, this Baltimore Raven team. But the thing with Flowers, pretty much 10, 15 fantasy points you could pencil him in weekly for, but nothing more than the 15 pretty much. Besides week 1, we had a big game at the Buffalo Bills. His numbers have pretty much been, like I said, 10 to 15 points. This week it is a great matchup, Thanksgiving night, with Cincinnati coming in, a defense that can't stop anyone. But I think this could be a Derrick Henry type of ball game. 23, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots. So Diggs, It's been an up and down season for him, where there were some weeks where he was a touchdown dependent wide receiver, and last week it was a nothing game. But Monday Night Football, the bright lights, Diggs usually steps up and has big performances in these primetime ball games. In a matchup versus the New York Giants, a defense that can't stop anyone, I think Diggs bounces back in this one, and he has one of the better quarterbacks in the league throwing to him as well, obviously, in Drake May. 24, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Shakir, it's been a solid season for him. He's the number one option in this passing game for this Buffalo Bill team. We'll see if Dalton Kincaid come back to the lineup this week at the Steelers. But I think Shakir, he could go out there once again, put in good possession wide receiver. And like I said, there's not many options on this offense that are consistent. So Shakir should get peppered with targets and make some plays in this one. 25, Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. So Rome Odunze, his numbers have definitely come back down to earth, where to begin the season, he was a wide receiver, pretty much 100 and a touchdown the first month of the season. So this week, a tough matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles. I know CeeDee Lamb and Pickens had good games last week, especially Pickens going for 146 and a touchdown on this defense. But Philadelphia back home, and after lapsing and blowing a game like that last week, I think I'm going to buckle down. And also, Odunze has struggled over the last month of the season. 26, Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jennings, he's been the number one wide receiver and the number two option in the passing game behind George Kittle. And Juwan Jennings, we know he can run the routes. We know him and Brock Purdy have a great rapport, and he's a playmaker. And he's a hard guy to tackle as well. We saw last week versus Carolina, broke 3 tackles and had a 12-yard touchdown. So this week at Cleveland, definitely a tough matchup. And Denzel Ward most likely going to be shadowing him the majority of this game. But I still think Jennings goes out there and puts in a quality performance. 27, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Sutton, the last month of the season, Troy Franklin's actually outplayed him in this offense. But I think after the bye week here, him and Knicks are going to get back on the same page. Sutton had a big season last year, got a nice contract extension in the offseason. And this week at the Commanders, with Marshawn Lattimore out for the season, and their defense, even with Lattimore, wasn't good in the secondary. I think Sutton could go out there and put in a all-right game. 28, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it looks like Thomas Jr. will finally be back in the lineup, and it's a good matchup to come back at the Tennessee Titans, a defense that can't stop anyone. Brian Thomas, though, this season's had a lot of drop problems, and him and Lawrence haven't always been on the same page. But I think this week they'll get him back in action and see what he could do. 29, Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders. So with Jaden Daniels still out in a tough matchup with Patrick Surtain, most likely shadowing Deebo majority of the game. I don't see Deebo ceiling being this high. And like I said, with a full slate of games, some of these wide receivers that in other weeks are going to be ranked higher obviously drop down the list with every team playing. So like I said, tough matchup for Deebo. Terry McLaurin possibly returning to this lineup as well finally for this Commander team, where he'll take some targets away from him. So he's not a high ceiling player. 30, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. So like I said, Franklin the last month has outplayed Cortland Sutton, and he's showing speed and he's showing the routes. He's improved on running his routes and getting deeper into his routes is Troy Franklin. That's definitely paid off for him and for fantasy owners over the last few weeks. So this week it's a good matchup at the Commanders. Like I said, they haven't stopped anyone all season long. 31, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So definitely a touchdown-dependent wide receiver DK Metcalf is. Even if Aaron Rodgers does return, where it's looking up that he might in this ball game versus the Buffalo Bills. Well, I know their defense isn't all that great, but Metcalf, in games he's scoring a touchdown, he's barely reaching double-digit fantasy points more times than not. So last week he had a nice little bubble screen to score a touchdown with DK Metcalf with Mason Rudolph in their quarterback. But like I said, his ceiling just isn't that high. And the funny thing is as well, there's no one in that receiving room. DK Metcalf, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson in the receiving room. So with those guys there, Metcalf's still not doing much. And at tight end, Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith, he just doesn't have a high ceiling this season with this Steelers team. 32, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. I think Watson's a better option than his teammate Romeo Doubs. Doubs hasn't done much over the last few weeks, and we've seen a big game from Watson going back to week 11, 2 touchdowns at the New York Giants. So this week, potential high-scoring game, Thanksgiving game at Detroit. We saw last season Watson start that game off with a 50-yard catch on a bomb down the field. So like I said, Watson, he's got playmaking ability. Health has been the only issue holding him back. And this week, I think they got to open up the pass game a little more as Green Bay. 33, Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Quentin Johnson, the last month of the season, he had 2 games with a goose egg. So this week, coming off bye, I think this offense gets back intact where they got shut down versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 11 before the bye. And this week, it's a good matchup to get everyone back on the same page with the Vegas Raiders coming in. And we know their defense that can't stop anyone. We just saw the Cleveland Browns go out there and even score 24 points on them. 34 Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. It's been a bust of a season, no doubt about it, for Xavier Worthy this season. But this week, it's a good matchup at the Dallas Cowboys. I know their defense is improved up front, but still in the secondary, Deron Bland's not a great cover corner, and their secondary all season long's gotten burned on the deep ball. And we even saw it last week from Devonta Smith catching a deep one in that game. So I think Worthy in this one, it wouldn't be surprising me if we see like a 50-yard reception or even possibly a touchdown on a play like that. 35 Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been a good trade deadline acquisition, is Jacoby Myers, for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And to get Brian Thomas back in the lineup as well, possibly, that's a good 1-2 tandem, in my opinion. And this week with a good matchup at Tennessee, and Myers has found the end zone in last week's ball game, and him and Lawrence have a pretty good rapport. He's definitely a good flex or wide receiver 3 this week. And the 36th and final receiver on rankings, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So DJ Moore, it's been an up and down season. Even last season, he had some good games and some games where he couldn't do much for the Chicago Bear team, where him and Caleb Williams aren't on the same page. And the thing with Caleb Williams, he'll have some big games, and some games he looks like one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. So Moore did have 2 touchdowns last week, and this week it is a tougher matchup at Philly, one of the best defenses in the league. So we'll see if he could go out there and at least be decent. So that's a top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 13 of the fantasy football season.